Hey everyone, it's JustJoosh here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about the new Knights of the Seven Kingdoms show that has been released on HBO over the past few weeks. Something I haven't talked about on this channel yet is my love for the Game of Thrones franchise, also known as the A Song of Ice and Fire series, if you're a real, if you're a true nerd and have read the books. But yeah, no, I'm a big fan of that franchise. I've read all the books. I've, of course, watched all seasons of the TV show, and I've been paying a lot of attention to the series spin-offs and everything else that George has been sort of releasing about the series, basically since I first consumed those original books and that TV show. We had House of the Dragon release about 2 years or so ago, I think, and that series has been really enjoyable. It does a great job of adapting that particular period of Westerosi history. We have more recently gotten this new show called Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and this is based on the Dunk and Egg series of novellas released by George R. R. Martin. It takes place in the same world as the original Game of Thrones show, but this series does act as a prequel. It takes place about, I think, 100 years or so before the start of the Game of Thrones series. And let me just tell you guys, right off the bat, I have loved watching this show over the past few weeks. The series, it's a different take on Westeros. It's a little bit more of a smaller scale sort of vibe because, Game of Thrones, it was about this, big sort of like world-ending threat, and this series, it's really just focused on the storyline between, a couple of characters and them just, experiencing the world of Westeros. And the stakes are a lot smaller as well because it's just, focused really on these characters day-to-day living their lives. There are important and big things that happen to them, but in comparison to the original show, it definitely just doesn't have as much of a sort of serious, dramatic tone or that type of thing. It's really just a more sort of humorous series, but it does also still have a real sense of heart there as well, which allows you to sort of form an attachment to these characters and allows the story to really tell like a really rather endearing story. Now, a lot of people are going to be experiencing this story for the first time through the series, and I think that's, awesome because I am familiar with this story already through this graphic novel version of The Hedge Knight, which is the first novella in the Dunk and Egg series. So while I haven't read the novellas themselves properly, I am familiar with the interpretation of the story, at least through the graphic novel version, so I did have somewhat of a basis of, what to expect going into this show, and it totally lived up to my expectations and even surpassed them. I've been really satisfied with the quality of this show. So anyways, what is the show actually about? Well, it all really starts with this big tourney. And we encounter this tourney through the main character of Dunk, who is later called Sir Duncan the Tall. The story picks up with the death of Dunk's sort of father figure, whose name is Sir Arlen. And after the death of Sir Arlen, Dunk doesn't really know what exactly to do with himself, but he decides that he is going to take on the role of a knight himself. The series is kind of ambiguous about whether or not Sir Arlen ever actually knighted him, but nonetheless he does decide to take on that role of being a knight, and so he decides, well, if I'm a knight, I gotta go to this big tourney that's coming up because, that's what a knight would do. And it's also somewhat of a matter of practicality as well because Dunk, he needs money to live, and the only way that he can see how to make money at the moment is to go enlist in this tournament and hopefully earn some coin by participating in it there. Along the way, he meets with this young boy who is very, bald, and he says that he wants to be his squire. He's this well-spoken boy named Egg, and while Dunk sort of initially refuses to take him on as his squire, the boy proves to be quite persistent, and he ends up agreeing to let him squire him for the tournament. So the rest of the story revolves around these characters trying to enlist in this jousting tournament, as well as some of the shenanigans and chaos that follows in this pursuit. But yeah, the main story, particularly around the beginning, is pretty interesting because you have Dunk, he's trying to enter this tournament, but what he quickly finds is that if you aren't a knight of notable reputation and you don't come from, a big family name, then you're going to have a lot of, basically a difficult time trying to get this nobility to pay attention to you. And that's really the core theme of what this show is talking about. It's sort of about the difference between the higher class and the lowborn class, and the idea of what does it mean to actually be a knight? How are you supposed to be, honorable and defend the weak? Because what you quickly find as you go throughout the story is that, a lot of these nobles who claim to be, very honorable, chivalrous knights, they actually turn out to be assholes, and it's really only the lower sort of common folk that have a good understanding, perhaps, of what it properly means to be a knight. So yeah, the story is great, but I'm not going to talk any more about it now, just for the sake of spoilers. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of my general impressions about the show, and then we'll maybe move into more spoiler territory afterwards. First of all, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the performances. I thought that all of the characters were excellently portrayed in this series. A lot of these characters were actually given, quite a bit better and stronger performances in the show, which makes these characters more interesting even than they were in, I think, the original material. Characters like Dunk is brought, to life so well. He is presented as just being this, lovable dummy. Egg is, of course, this elegant, well-spoken kid, but he is also definitely, he brings that mischievous sort of side to Egg as well. Characters who, were present in the original story, but, their performances really brought those characters to life even more and made the characters more important and memorable than in the original. People like Sir Lionel Baratheon and Raymond Fosway, those performances, I think, really help to highlight those characters and really make them more interesting than they were in the original, so that's great. When it also comes to these sort of production sort of design elements, as I guess we would refer to them, like the sets and the costuming, oh my gosh, is that stuff done to just such an amazing extent. The jousting tournament does really give a lot of great excuses for us to see a lot of, heraldry and, beautiful pieces of armor and, bright colorful tents and everything like that. And all of that stuff is super well realized. The costuming is second to none in this. I mean, we've gotten pretty lucky in terms of how armors are depicted and stuff in House of the Dragon. I think those armors are even better than they were in the original Game of Thrones show, and the look to this show is equally as good, if not better, than it is even in House of the Dragon. So that is, that was really great to see. The music is also amazing. The music has always been consistently good with the Game of Thrones franchise. They've yet to release a project that has sort of lacked in this way. I've been listening to the whistling theme song quite a bit, basically ever since the series has initially released. I'm probably playing it in this video as well. There are times when the Game of Thrones main theme is used as well, and I think that those new arrangements are great and they're utilized well in the show. There are a couple of instances when the music, however, did throw me for a loop a little bit, and I'm not too sure really how I feel about them. There's a scene that makes use of a jazz-style track, which is definitely a little bit odd, considering, this is a middle-aged sort of fantasy show, and, the Game of Thrones universe hasn't employed any modern sort of musical elements up until this series, and I don't think that is an inclusion that I like very much. They also include, a proper sort of modern sort of song at the end of one of the credits themes, and I don't really think that it fits that well. I think just for the sake of immersion, I would prefer that in the future they would just keep it to the, orchestral original soundtrack. That being said, that's really the only negative that I have to say about the show. Everything else is just, top notch. So yeah, if you are interested in the world of Westeros and you haven't checked the show out yet, I would totally recommend you do so. Even if you aren't necessarily familiar with the original Game of Thrones show, I do think you will definitely benefit if you have some contextual knowledge about the story, but you can also go into this series and appreciate it totally and entirely on its own, especially because the series is definitely a little bit different tonally than the original Game of Thrones. So if you aren't necessarily into this, 8-season, multi-episode, epic drama type sort of thing that might seem like a little bit intimidating for you to get into, I would recommend giving this a try to start. So now I did want to talk a little bit about some spoilery type stuff, so you have been warned from this point on in the video, I'm going to talk about some spoilers. Okay, so first and foremost, the most important thing, Egg is of course actually Aegon. This is a plot twist that I'm sure most people, if you are familiar with the Game of Thrones universe, will see coming in the show. In fact, I think that a lot of people are probably already familiar with the fact that Egg is Aegon. before you even watch the show. It is something that is actually talked about in the original Game of Thrones series. Sir Aemon Targaryen, when he is sort of like dying because he is Egg's brother, he talks a little bit about, Egg during his final sort of moments dying. So yeah, that doesn't come as too much of a shocking surprise, but the consequences that the fact that he is Aegon, he is a Targaryen, has on the narrative are huge. And this is really because Egg basically gets Dunk to go and attack Aerion, who is his older brother and also a big piece of because yeah, the scene where Aerion attacks Tenzel is quite famous. It's really this, the sort of moment that the plot of the series changes. It takes a drastic turn. So yeah, when Dunk attacks Aerion, the sort of pacing and plot of the show totally changes. It goes from being a more lighthearted series about a boy and this knight trying to enter this tournament, and it now becomes basically about this trial to try to keep Dunk alive. Dunk, of course, was totally right in what he did. Aerion was just attacking a girl for basically what amounts to no reason, but still he did attack a prince of the royal family. There's going to be some consequences for that. So this is, of course, where we get this Battle of Seven, because, of course, in the world of Westeros, you have the ability to declare a trial by combat against someone who you are accusing a crime of, and you also have the ability to, declare this Battle of 7 against 7, where you need to have 7 companions against 7 companions. And this plot setup does actually create some rather interesting scenarios. There is a lot of tension in just having Dunk trying to find 7 champions that are actually willing to represent him, which of course he eventually does when Prince Baelor does step out onto the field and declares that he will fight for Dunk, who he believes to have been acting justly. And of course that's only the first part of it. When the actual battle does start, it's quite intense as well. I think this is one of, if not the singular best, action scenes that we have seen in a Game of Thrones show. I really love the extra detail that this show adds, where they sort of go over Dunk's sort of origin and backstory during that fight. This is a detail that wasn't present, at the very least, in the graphic novel version of the story. I don't know if it's present in the novella, but I think it was something that was added for the sake of the TV show, and I really do think that it was a great addition. And that's because this story really does show that Dunk has been bullied by people who are more, powerful than him, basically his entire life. He grew up as being the lowest of the low, like an orphan boy in Flea Bottom, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the world of Game of Thrones, and he had to deal with basically a bunch of crap from city guards and other people who were looking to take advantage of him, and he didn't really have much of a way to fight back because he didn't have the social status to do so. And that's just kind of how things work in this, feudalistic world, and even really in our modern world as well. The rich and powerful can get away with whatever they want to. So it does add this extra sort of dramatic layer to show how Dunk has been treated poorly basically his entire life before we see him actually come through and win this fight, which was really such an epic, triumphant moment, even though he totally got beaten the crap up. So yeah, no, it really does look like for a little bit that we are going to have a nice ending in the world of Game of Thrones for a change, but of course that can't possibly be allowed. So we find out at the very end of the 5th episode that Prince Baelor unfortunately dies fighting on behalf of Dunk. Man, we can't have in Westeros. Thankfully, however, despite this tragedy, there is a little bit of solace at the end of the series, where we do get to see Egg get a chance to go on and become Dunk's squire properly, and we have a setup for what will basically be the rest of the series, where Dunk and Egg will sort of travel the world of Westeros and go on multiple different adventures together, learn a little bit more about the world of Westeros along the way. So yeah, what an amazing series, and what an amazing ending as well. I'm really excited for whatever they cook up for Season 2. I will most certainly be seated when it is there. I think Season 2 is actually set to be released next year. It's going to be based on the second novella. I believe that one is titled The Smiling Knight. I haven't read that one, so I will definitely get around to reading it before the next series comes out. But I've really liked what they have been presenting us with so far, and I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. Overall, I would totally recommend, again, if you haven't seen this show yet and you are a fan of the world of Westeros, you gotta do yourself a favor and go see it. But yeah, no, I've just had this series on my mind over the past little while it's been sort of wrapping up, and I wanted to make a video just sharing some of my thoughts on it because, man, I've just really been enjoying this series. So yeah, anyways, as always, I've been JustJoosh, and that is just my opinion. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care.